who is on vacation. And boy, do we have a show for you. Security clearances stripped, media bias exposed, and a potential major setback for Special Counsel Robert Mueller. We'll have it covered throughout the hour. Earlier this week, the White House made big news when it announced that President Trump had stripped John Brennan of his security clearance. In case you're not familiar with Mr. Brennan's work, he's the guy that went from Obama's CIA director to a far-left cable news pundit and from almost the moment President Trump took office. Here's what he said tonight.
What really gets under my skin is Mr. Trump's lack of decency, integrity, honesty, and his lack of commitment to this country's well-being and national security. And Mr. Trump, time after time, I think, has really just disappointed millions of Americans, which I'm trying to give voice to. And so I know a lot of people think that a former intelligence official shouldn't be doing this. I don't consider what I'm doing political at all.
Now, 15 top former intelligence officials from both political parties, you see them on screen, have come to Brennan's defense, releasing a statement that said in part, and I quote, "We all agree that the president's action regarding John Brennan and the threats of similar action against other former officials have nothing to do with who should and should not hold security clearances and everything to do with an attempt to stifle free speech." It goes on to say decisions on security clearances should be based on national security concerns and not political views. Later today, 60 former CIA officers also released a letter criticizing Trump's action against Brennan, but President Trump is sticking by his guns.
I've gotten tremendous response from having done that because security clearances are very important to me, very, very important. And I've had a tremendous response for having done that. There's no silence. If anything, I'm giving him a bigger voice. Many people don't even know who he is, and now he has a bigger voice, and that's okay with me because I like taking on voices like that. I've never respected him. I've never had a lot of respect.
And Brennan, by the way, might not be the only one who loses his clearance. The Washington Post reporting tonight that White House officials have drafted documents that cancel security clearances of several current and former officials. The Post reports that Trump wants to sign most, if not all of them, due to his anger over the Russia investigation. Joining me now for reaction are Buck Sexton, a former CIA analyst, Jim Hansen, president of the Security Studies Group, and Chris Hahn, who's a former aide to Democrat senator and the senior senator from New York, Chuck Schumer. Gentlemen, good evening. Good to see you here again.
Good to see you.
All right, so let's dive right in and begin with John Brennan. This is what he had to say earlier on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow.
I was very concerned and aware that the Russians were trying to leverage U.S. citizens in order to achieve their objectives in the presidential election.
While you were in office as CIA director before you left on Inauguration Day, did you conclude that U.S. persons were successfully leveraged in that effort?
No.
Now, I'll go to you first, Buck. If the question is asked, if the concern was there and the answer is no, then why is John Brennan going the way he does against the president?
That's a question that I don't think anybody can answer, including John Brennan, if you push him enough. People are talking a lot here, David, about how it's unprecedented to pull a clearance in this way by a president. But what's also unprecedented is for not just a former intel chief, but the most recent CIA director, not to just be critical of the president, but to be actively undermining the president, calling him a traitor, in fact, to the country. This man is the commander-in-chief, and Brennan's allegations have gone far beyond what you would see in normal political discourse, to the point where you could even say it's undermining institutions, to borrow from one of the common Democrat lines in terms of Trump on all things. And I see this now as a time when there are a few levels here, David. One is, I don't think that people who don't have government business should maintain clearances. I think that should just be a general rule. And you certainly shouldn't maintain a clearance if you're going on TV and suggesting that you have secret information about the president that you can't really tell, but it's what's informing your judgment that he's actually guilty of treason. That's a big problem.
All right, so Chris, especially with what Buck just said, John Brennan going on TV, his clearance carrying the specter, giving his words more weight. I think that's fair to say for anyone in that position. But his answer was no, so I'll put the same question to you. If the answer is no, and given what Buck just said, then is John Brennan being honest or somewhat disingenuous in what he's doing on CNN or any of the other channels?
I watched a lot of that interview earlier, and he did not say that the president was out of line, and he did say, though, that he had new information that was widely publicized, including the Don Jr. meeting in Trump Tower that most of us didn't know about until this last summer. So there are more information that has come out, and I think this has led him to believe that there has been some sort of collusion, not necessarily with the president, and maybe a conspiracy that involved Americans that needs to be dealt with and needs to be uncovered by Mueller. As for the president stripping his clearance, look, I don't think any of us believe that a president should use the power of his office to retaliate against his political opponents. That is un-American. It is a banana republic-like move. This is not something we associate with the American president. This is like Nixon's enemies list, except for Sarah Sanders goes to the podium and reads the names on the enemies list. And if we had a Congress that was doing its job, it would investigate exactly why this president was doing this. And I think come January, we will have a Congress that will do its job under the Constitution and hold this president accountable through checks and balances.
Well, if they take the Congress, I think we can expect that from the Democrats. Jim, to you and this issue of security clearances. They're kept because, if needed, they will call back these advisors. This has been common throughout administrations. However, if the administration has made a decision that they are not going to call you back because of, as they see it, John Brennan is standing out against the administration, they may not trust his advice, and they have the right, then what is it really all about to remove his security clearance if they're not going to call him back? Why should he keep it if they're not going to call him back?
There's absolutely no reason for him to keep it because no one is going to trust his judgment now, having said what he did. You know, he basically claimed that the president has committed treason. So the idea that this is something that the president did, that is Donald Trump's fault, it's not. It's John Brennan's fault and the rest of the clown car of Obama national security officials who ginned up an investigation into Trump Russia based on a few minor players in Trump's orbit. Then they added in the DNC-funded Steele dossier to the mix. And the problem is there was no Trump Russia. So now what we're looking at is the Democrat deep state collusion blowing up in their faces like it was a Wile E. Coyote Acme smear generator. There's no there.
All right, gentlemen, let's bring this into the mix. This is John Brennan again on MSNBC talking about the special counsel, Robert Mueller.
It's called the duly appointed special counsel who was given the mandate to investigate what Russia did in terms of interference in our presidential election, and who might have been working in support of Russian objectives, and who might have committed a crime in that process. And so that's why Robert Mueller is a real national treasure. He needs to be able to continue with this investigation unimpeded.
So, Chris Hahn, does removing John Brennan's security clearance in any way impede Robert Mueller, his national treasure as Brennan sees him, impede his ability to carry out his investigation?
I don't think so. I think if the president acts towards going after Mueller anymore, I think he's going to lose some support, additional support in Congress from even people in his own party. But look, the bottom line is this. The president did not consult with his national security apparatus before he took the clearance away from Brennan. Those people might have said, Mr. President, we might want to work with him on things that he had worked on prior to leaving office as a continuation of government, some institutional knowledge. He didn't do that. This was a decision made in the president's press shop to distract from the Omarosa story. And we're told today, earlier this evening, that the president has several others lined up to distract as needed if the news cycle gets away from him, as it did this week. That's despicable. He's playing games with our national security, and that's not right. And I would like to hear what Dan Coats has to say. I would like to hear what the current CIA director has to say. I would like to hear what they have to say about this, because I don't think that they are too keen on this. They were saying that they did not know, they were not consulted, and that's just wrong. There's procedures and policies when taking away. There's a process to take away these clearances, David, and the president didn't follow it.
Well, he is the executive buck, and he has the right, and consultation is not legally required. But you were in the shop, and the CIA director is not the only one who has the information. He's certainly the head of the agency, and maybe within that agency the highest classification authority, but others have the information. So is the CIA director the only one that can be called back if they need information?
No, I think that's pretty overstated. Also, anybody who's spent any time in the intelligence community will tell you that there are a lot of people working on any one issue, and there's a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge from people who aren't political appointees, who stay in these agencies for decades and decades of their career. So the notion that you're going to have this crisis situation where you can't bring back some director to find something out, I think it's just preposterous. That's honestly why you also hear it described in press reports as a courtesy, and that's why a lot of these individuals hold their clearance. But it's a different thing to have that courtesy when you're somebody who's then in private life versus somebody who is clearly trading on that recent access, not just for media appearances. And by the way, the whole thing about being silenced is just on its face ridiculous. He's clearly not being silenced. He's on TV practically every 5 minutes. You're seeing Brennan and all the other anti-Trump folks who are getting lots and lots of airtime and additional play here. And then also, David, I can understand there's some concern about political retaliation. I think that's a fair point to make for some people in some cases.
Thank you.
But one, I think Brennan is the exception so far. And two, this is not that big a deal. The people that are suggesting that this is the equivalent of, the Japanese being interned in camps or anything like that are going way overboard. But that's what we tend to see from Trump.
Where does it end?
Well, we certainly see the hyperbole.
Where
Let me
does it
bring
end?
Rush Limbaugh into this. Of course, Rush has been very upfront about this. And here he talks about essentially trying to overthrow a duly constituted, elected president. Let's play it.
Where is it written that John Brennan, above all else, must be granted his security clearance when this guy is actively engaged in overthrowing a duly constituted elected president? Well, you know the answer to the question. It's because the left doesn't care about the Constitution. It doesn't care about the rule of law. It cares only about its power. And, folks, none of those are cliches. None of those are exaggerations.
Well, Jamie Hansen, you heard it from the Rushner himself. So what do you say to that?
I think we saw this. It started during the election, it ran through the transition, and continued once President Trump was inaugurated. They've been trying to stop him, they've been trying to discredit his administration, and now they're trying to get him removed, and there's nothing to remove him on. There is no collusion with Russia. There is, however, a collection of former Obama officials and DNC folks who did conspire to create a controversy and who were leaking information, a lot of it potentially classified, to the media. That includes Brennan, who's a prime suspect in that, along with Clapper and other people who signed these letters in support of Brennan, saying he shouldn't have lost his security clearance. So they're the ones, I think the problem for him, it may flip to be looking at them as opposed to Trump, and they may get some unintended consequences.
All right, gentlemen, I know the debate's going to continue, but we've got to cut it here. Quick last word, Chris, go ahead.
The people who wrote this letter supporting Brennan include the man who led the mission to kill Osama bin Laden, which Brennan oversaw.
He didn't lead the mission.
These are American patriots that care about our national security, not some conspiracy nonsense that you just spouted and that Rush is whining about.
All right, Chris, I gave you the last word. We've known each other a long time.
Thank you,
I was
David.
fair to you, my friend. Gentlemen.